This is actually take 2 of the podcast. We had to stop the other day. I've had a clothing change. The bike's been raced on now. Saxo Bank want to take me to a Grand Tour in my first year, maybe even the Giro. And he goes, "Oh, bloody hell, mate, that's stupid." It's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Look, you've got talent, but you're green." There was no big communities. There were maybe 20 pros back then living in Girona. And then we sort of moved through the different color palettes through the year, and the full circle journey and the color expression and the shape of those circles evolved. And his design process to get there was insane. Like, I think 200-300 iterations of the jersey. I'm really fascinated by like the backbone of human beings. There's 4 things: the T, the A, the G, and the C. And why don't we think about gravel? What are the 4 key tenets of gravel? And we're like, I think a lot of things actually go to market before they're totally refined because they don't have the ability to actually print stuff, hand stitch it, go and test it, and bring it back and just keep working on things till it's actually ready.
Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Castelli podcast. In today's episode, we will continue the fascinating and inspiring journey of Nathan Haas, a legendary figure in the world of cycling. Known not only for his impressive decade-long World Tour career, Nathan is also a prominent voice within the world of gravel racing. If you missed the first episode, I highly recommend you starting there, where we discuss the future of gravel racing, the evolution and marginal gains in cycling apparel and equipment, and how these and other factors are driving increased speed and performance. We also touched on why Girona has become a vibrant hub for cyclists of all levels and disciplines, including triathletes. Nathan shared his love for the new Gabba R and other more casual gravel training pieces from the Castelli collection and more. A complete action-packed episode with something new for everyone to learn. But in today's second episode, we will take a deep dive into Nathan's career. From how it all began to his first meeting with Castelli's brand manager Steve Smith and architect and designer Richard Pearce, who later designed Nathan's race jerseys. We will explore how they first met and delve into Richard's journey from designing David Miller's exclusive shoes for Physique during Miller's final season to creating the iconic 2017 Team Sky jersey. We'll also look at the exclusive Richard architecture and design by Castelli collection, where each jersey graphic tells multiple stories and draws inspiration from Nathan's career and gravel life. But before we start today's episode, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy this podcast, now is the perfect time to help us, help you, and help others find the show. Just hit follow and rate the pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. You're also welcome to DM us on social media if you have a question or a topic you would like us to cover in a future episode. But now, back to the show. Let's dive in. Let's rewind a bit to when everything started. I mean, back in Brisbane, Australia, when you were shredding trails and setting goals, and what were you into and how did your journey into pro cycling begin?
Yeah, so I actually was born in Brisbane, but I never lived there. It was like a hot minute that my family was in Brisbane, but I grew up in Canberra, Australia. And I sort of got into the sport from... I guess it was a bit of an accident. I was really into playing Australian football, and just with some injury, I had to have some time off playing the sport. And there were some guys who lived on my street that were on like dirt jumping bikes, and I thought it was pretty cool. So I started off doing dirt jumping, and then I raced downhill. And then the races I did well in were the ones you had to pedal a lot. And then I went to a cross-country race, which was like in my local town, but it was the national championships. And I ended up getting second in my first ever race. I wasn't even in cycling kit. I was wearing a football jersey. And the national coach came up to me and was like, "Who the f*** are you?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm just a footballer, just having a bit of fun on the bike." He's like, "I think you might be better at cycling than football." And I was like, "I beg to differ." I think he was right. Didn't have a football career. But that just morphed into following the national team a little bit with mountain biking. I was always on the outside of the sort of like course stream for the main riders. So I was, always fighting to get a spot. It wasn't like, Nathan's one of the riders. It was like, it was hard work. And ended up doing 2.5 seasons of World Cups here in Europe. And I was all fully supported at that point. Like I was working in cafes, restaurants, like cutting onions and carrots, working in bars just to get enough money to actually come over to Europe to do like a 3-4 month racing block. staying with, vague connections through family, friends. Like, I was pretty much couch surfing for 4 months and trying to race the world's best. I did pretty well at it, but then I decided to quit at the World Championships in 2009, which were actually in my hometown of Canberra. So I was like, there's just no money in cycling. Like, we just had the GFC, and all of the kind of prospect teams that I was talking to folded. The mountain bike scene literally fell apart, and teams literally just stopped mid-year in 2008. So I thought to myself, it's time to get a bit more serious with life. So I started university, and but a week after the World Championships, the sort of state coach called me and goes, "Oh, look, we've got a composite team at the Tour of Tasmania. We just need one more rider. I know you're really fit right now. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Oh, dude, I don't have a road bike." He's like, "We got one for you." So I flew down, and I thought it was pretty cool because they said, all your meals are paid for, accommodations paid for, you can just race. And I thought, I'll give it a go. And then this was when there were a lot of like pro-continental teams that came for Tour of Tasmania. It was a really big race back then. And I almost won 2 stages. We got caught like on the finish line on 2 stages. And I won the King of the Mountains jersey. So then a road team approached me and was like, "Hey, do you want to come do road with us?" And this was a team called Genesis Wealth Advisors. And little did we know this was sort of going to become the engine room of professional cycling in Australia. The national program was just kind of ruining guys, just taking all these track riders and, all these mega talents. They either made it to the World Tour and then decided to stop very soon after because they were just all cooked. Whereas the school that I came through was like, it was wholesome. It was real bike racing, and it was having fun with your friends, but racing like a team and learning the real basics. And then after a year with them, I signed World Tour. So I won every race in the National Road Series except for one. And then I won the Herald Sun Tour when there were like 6 World Tour teams there. And then I won the Japan Cup the week later. And I beat Ivan Basso and the little prince. Oh my gosh. Cunego in a sprint after 4,000 meters climbing. And then I just had like a table full of World Tour options, and it was like, what's just happened? Like for me, the dream of going World Tour was never really a thing. It was just all of a sudden I was on a road team. All of a sudden I was doing well. All of a sudden I had these contracts, and then all of a sudden I was moving to Europe, and it was kind of spooky, to be honest. Yeah. So then from then on, I would say I feel like I had a great career. Because, I'm really pleased with it, because I don't think I was ever gifted with, the best engine. I had a lot of, health issues that worked into my career that I kind of had to work with and around. So I think I got the best out of myself, and I'm really proud of it. But
then you moved to Garmin Sharp. How did that come along?
So I had quite a few World Tour options, but because I was really nervous about going to the World Tour, I got a phone call from Alan Piper, and he called me up and he's like, "G'day mate, I'm Alan Piper." And I was like, "Oh, Alan, I know who you are." He's like, "Look, we want to sign you." And I was like, "Okay, I've got quite a few options and I've got no idea what to do." Yeah. And he was like, "Well, what do the other teams want to do with you?" And I was like, "Well, Saxo Bank want to take me to a Grand Tour in my first year, maybe even the Giro." And I was like, and he goes, "Oh, bloody hell, mate, that's stupid as shit." Talking in pure Alan Piper terms. And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Look, you've got talent, but you're green." And I was like, "Go on." And he's like, "We're going to give you a really basic program for the first year. We're going to sort of touch you into a World Tour race and then send you to America for California. Take the pressure off. You'll do Tour of Langkawi because you're already really good in the Asia Tour. You know that racing. But we're just going to keep sort of like dripping you into the European stuff. And then we're going to take you back to Utah and Colorado. And you're going to keep you in the fold, build you up. But you're definitely not doing a Grand Tour in your first year." And I was like, in my mind at that point, I was like, "Absolutely." And he goes, "But all I can offer you is minimum wage. That's all we've got left." And now the teams were actually starting to like compete for my price tag. And I was like, "Alan, I think I'm going to sign with you instead." I said, "I've got these really big cash offers, but I'm kind of scared to go on those teams." And the other thing was, I didn't know where doping was in the world of cycling, but JV, he's got some critics, but JV did one thing that was really beautiful. He drew a line in the sand, and he said, "This is not the doping team. This is the clean team." And, even speaking to my parents, they were like, really happy that I chose to go to the team that was actually saying like, what the hell was cycling doing?
Yeah.
Let's just start afresh. Yeah, and I think it was the best decision I ever made in my life. You know, at the time it sort of like cost me some potential income, but I think it was where I learned how to be a pro cyclist, and I was brought up through the team in a way that was really digestible for my experience level, and it really led me to take the next steps through the season. And then by the end of the season, I won Tour of Britain. I was actually second, but then John Tin and Locke went positive, so I kind of won by default, which I thought was funny. I was like, I thought this was over. It's not over.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really cool. And then I stayed 4 years with that team before making a few changes for the rest of my career. And it was a great place to start.
That was then in 2012. And that was also the year that you moved to Girona.
So I had signed my contract. I did Tour Down Under. And then I moved to Girona. I didn't even have an apartment. I just had a suitcase and I was like, And I knew George Bennett through another friend. Yeah. George was in the same boat. He got to Girona a day before I did. He went to a real estate agent and he goes, dude, I think I got an apartment. And I was like, cool, man. So I meet my housemate for the first time, move into this apartment for the first time. We didn't have blankets or anything. We got there at like 8 p.m. at night. We were like, oh God, this is going to be a bad night. And I think we got some frozen pizza for dinner. And it was just, figure it out from there. I didn't know the roads. And I'd never done a road race in Europe until I was in the World Tour, which is like, that's how kind of green I was in the European scene. So it was really hard. The first year was
insane. Like
first year was, and the place isn't what it is now. There wasn't very much English. There was no big communities. There were maybe 20 pros back then living in Girona. Yeah. Fortunately, most of them were on the team. So, I had people to ride with, but it was really diving into the unknown. That's for sure.
How was the cycling in Girona back then? Because it's definitely not the cycling mecca that we know of today. That was more Mallorca, Nice, and those places. How was cycling in Girona back then? The cycling community, and it wasn't as international as it is today. I mean, thanks to, I think Lance Armstrong was one of the first one moving over. But then, Johnny Vels.
Yeah, Johnny Vels was the real instigator of the cycling movement.
Back in the day with Motorola, I think.
Yeah. And then when he was involved with US Postal, he was the one that actually was like, Girona is the perfect base. Great weather, great roads, close to airports. Yeah. It's perfect.
And then so many other professionals moved here after. But today is like the mecca. And now it's also the mecca for gravel, it seems like, European gravel riding. Yeah,
if you think the road riding's like 2D, gravel here is like 4D. There's nowhere else in the world that you can ride 360 from town and just have infinite fun, and it's just wicked. But no, the scene was really different. Something I do miss though is because cycling is a huge sport in Spain. If you were a pro cyclist, because there weren't that many of us, and you were going up a climb, cars would often come past like cheering support. It was like they recognized that you were a professional cyclist. They thought it was awesome, and it was easily the safest roads I've ever ridden on. But I think now, just with so many thousands of riders, I think there's a bit more tension on the roads. I still wouldn't call it dangerous by any means. Like if you ride in downtown LA, now there's a challenge. But it's just changed, and not in a bad way. It's just change. Like change is the only constant. So it's been interesting to watch for sure. But now I just laugh how easy it is for the neo pros to move here. There's English is just everywhere now, and there's medical systems set up. There's the banks all deal with the cyclists. There's so many real estate agents that almost like prey on the incoming cyclists because they tend to come with a comfortable salary to be able to get a good apartment, and now there's just a lot of sort of Anglo-focused restaurants, cafes, scenes. So it's it's very easy to move here now. Whereas for us, we sort of felt like we kind of broke the horse in a little bit.
Yeah. My first time in Girona was probably also in 2012. With the Garmin shop. I was there, working with David Miller together with Steve. But it just seemed like a typical like Spanish or Italian town where you would see a few tourists, but it's not like you're going to run into professional cyclists on the street as you would be doing today. But now you also include all the disciplines from gravel, road, track, everything.
Triathlon's been the latest big one since Jan Frodeno kind of kicked off his thing here. True. It's just been crazy. There's so many people out on these crazy TT bikes and aero helmets training now.
Yeah. So then fast forward, then you went on from the Garmin shop, that then became Team Cannondale to Katusha. No, Team Dimension Data first. We did, was that 2 seasons?
2 seasons there.
2 seasons with Katusha, 2 seasons with Cofidis. How was your French when you joined Cofidis in the end? If we need to fast forward almost till the end of your
actually,
career.
My dad was in the military when we were young, and we did a few overseas postings. And my dad decided to put us into like a French international school system. So my first like 7 years of school were only in French. So I dream in French. So it's completely fluent. So going to the team, that was the easiest part. Was just the language was not a problem. But yeah, it's a huge culture shock to be on a French team. I always wanted to be on a French team because there's like an emotion the French only get with cycling. But I also think there's a dark side to that, which is sometimes too emotional. You know, when things go bad, which is like 95% of a cycling career is not spent winning. They were pretty hardcore on, you know, how they spoke with riders and dealt with crisis. Whereas, you know, other teams, you know, where people keep more of a level head, you see amazing performances come straight after failure, whereas they kind of focused a lot on the bad, and I felt like it made like a bad soup that everyone was eating from, and then someone would have a breakout win and it was like, okay, we're good again. It's like, that cycling has to be kept somewhere in the middle.
True, yeah.
And yeah, there were some beautiful directors on, you know, throughout my career. My favorite of all was a guy called Ollie Cookson, who's now working with Ineos. But I've never met a better leader of men than Ollie. He just understood people, and I think he didn't come from a racing background. He was actually an architect. And I think sometimes that's what cycling's missing, is people that come in with other skills that can learn the cycling side. Because honestly, tactics they're very easy. And if you've got amazing riders, sometimes you don't even have tactics. I mean, does Tadej really even have a tactic every day? Sometimes he just pulls the trigger and says, I'm going, and he looks like a genius, which he is, but he's also just the best, you know, at what he does. It was a lot of fun going through different kind of institutions in cycling, because, you know, when I was at Dimension Data, it was a South African team. And
Russian?
Well, actually, it was more German, because it was Swiss by that point, but German was really the language of the team. And we had guys like Marcel Kittel, who was like, you know, hardcore, and, you know, Torsten Schmidt, who was another fantastic director, someone that just brought fun and happiness into the group. And that was where the sweet sauce was, with Torsten.
I rode on a Devo team in Denmark where Torsten was racing for the elite. It was called, you don't know that. That's like end 90s. It was called Team, I'm not kidding, Team Chicky World. They were yellow because that was a sponsor. They were like a local chicken farm brand. Like
awesome.
Exactly. And Torsten on the team must have been 98 or something. So I got to know him back then. I mean, of course, we never raced with him. We just met him when we teaming training camps and stuff. But yeah, no, super nice guy.
It's a legend.
Just hit me that thing. Yeah.
A legend.
Lost my mind. That's just kind of a journey, but also a lot of different culture inputs and.
I mean, you learn how to code switch, and I think it's. I think a key tenet to being a good cyclist is having good emotional intelligence. Yeah. And when you spend enough time with different cultures, you start to realize how vital communicating specifically to their culture is. Yeah. It often doesn't come back the other way.
No.
But you kind of have to mold. I had a fantastic time just experiencing so many things. But cycling's also really frustrating because we're all so hungry. We have so many aspirations, and only one guy can win every day.
Yeah.
So it's mentally very challenging. I think cyclists are the best losers on earth because we can lose and then still believe we can win the next day.
So correct. Yeah. It's all about, getting up the next day, then dust the dirt off and then get back in the saddle. And
we're addicted to the gamble.
We're addicted to the gamble. But again, like we talked about earlier on our conversation, like on the first interview here at the Girona store, where we touched on who remembers who got second or third, but even sometimes who even remembers who won the race, if it's not like the World Championships or Grand Tour or something. But people, they would remember the people behind the persona of the person, that the way that they communicate, how to show themselves, how they contribute to the cycling community overall in pro cycling, in amateur ranks, and yeah. Plus, cycling today has just become so big. There's so much happening and going on.
It's I got taught a hard lesson on my first year with Katusha. So I'd won a few races in the year. And just before the Tour de France, I was in a bunch sprint with Sagan and Gaviria, and it was a photo finish. None of us knew who won. And then 3 days later, I was second on the Queen stage with Richie Porte behind me. And I really had an amazing race.
Yeah.
I think it was honestly the form of my career. I just needed the right stage and I could have won. And I was almost sure thing in my mind that I was going to the Tour because everyone in the team had been pretty terrible that year. Like Katusha just was shit. Like they just had a really bad year. And Paul Marcel, it was really the start of his demise from his amazing heights where he was in cycling. And I got a phone call being like, yeah, you're not doing the Tour. And I was like, what the actual fuck?
Yeah.
They were like, no, we're taking a full team for a lead out train for Marcel. And I was like, yeah, the 2 races Marcel won this year, I was his second last guy. I'm part of the lead out. Like, no, we need the big engines for this. And I was like, guys, this is insane. Like you're sending a bunch of guys that are probably not going to finish the Tour. And Marcel is a massive question mark. And then they said, but Nathan, if you win a stage of the Tour de France, that's great for the team. But if Marcel wins a Tour stage, it's worth 10 times your Tour stage. And I kind of took it on board immediately. And I was like, actually, I finally understand cycling. Like, Marcel has much more of a commercial outcome if he wins a stage. It's the big German on a German team. Whereas if I win a stage, fantastic. But in 10 years' time, probably no one remembered who won it. But everyone will remember when Marcel smashed a sprint. So it's there's no two things that are equal in cycling.
Right. Coming back to what you just mentioned here before, you're talking about Ollie as an inspiring and a fantastic person, but also about creativity. Now I want to transfer a little bit into some of the beautiful jersey we have there behind you, up there on the wall, designed by an architect.
Yeah.
A good friend of yours. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that relationship started, but also I know that you guys, together with us here at Castelli this year, we also launched the Full Circle, which really showcasing your career with starting with the dirt, moving to road and returning to gravel. But maybe I'll let you do the talking about how the relationship also with Richard started and the idea for the collection.
Yeah, I guess as most stories do, they start just with 2 people having a nice chemistry together. I met Richard Pearce. He was working with David Miller in 2014 in David's retirement year. And David had this absolutely fantastically inspired idea. He was working with Physique and they designed, Richard did the design, but David helped with the kind of inspiration process, creative process of making a shoe specific for every single race he did in his last year. The one for Flanders was insane. The one for, I think, Catalonia was beautiful. And he didn't get to do the Tour that year, which was, a really big heart hurt for David. But that shoe was cool. Yeah. But yeah, every single shoe that they did so many. I think it was like 10 or 12 sets of shoes. It was crazy. But Richard came to La Vuelta, which was David's last ever Grand Tour. And, I had the honor to be there for it because it kind of felt like, a big closing of a chapter to be around. And then I just really hit it off with Richard and, I had a big connection going to London a lot. Richard was based in East London where I was spending time. So we started riding together and it was where we met Theo and we were all just going out on sort of these like canal rides, through East London out to the forest, Epping Forest. And we just sort of stayed friends ever through that. And then Richard moved to Girona when he started chapter 3 with Miller. And funnily enough, the office was 3 doors down from my house. So I spent a lot of time, a lot of afternoon beers with Richard and hanging out. And then, when I was sort of considering making the jump to gravel out of the World Tour, Richard was one of the first people I spoke to. And I said, hey, I think I want to do this. And he was like, we got to talk to Steve. This will be really awesome. We spoke to Steve. Steve sort of just said yes straight away. He's like, this will be so much fun. Let's just do it. And then the designing came. And the first thing we sort of worked on was Alberto from Castelli came up with, we had the idea of doing 5 different jerseys throughout the year. And we were going to do matching paint jobs with Colnago for each of those jerseys. So Alberto came up with 5 different color palettes, and he's like an absolute genius with color, because what he did was just honestly beautiful and insane and eye-catching and different. And then came in Richard, and Richard really sort of like broke things down. And it was the first time that I was it was the first time that I was the subject of a creative process, and it told me a lot about design and how so much can be part of something as basic actually as a bike jersey. Richard was really inspired by the story of coming from mountain biking, having a career there, and then a long road career, and then coming back to dirt. But it wasn't a mountain bike, it was like a road bike with mountain bike tires.
Yeah.
So he was sort of like, Nathan, this feels like a full circle to me. So that was where the first concept started. And the first jersey actually used like a radar concept. So it was sort of like the radar was burning an imprint over time for the mountain biking, and then the road sort of touched into that.
Yeah.
So it overlapped, and that went for a lot longer. And then there was a small radar for just where my gravel career was starting. But then Richard even went a step further, and he went on to pro cycling stats and even into mountain biking, and counted how many race days I've ever done. And we took a note of any time I got a victory, a podium, or even just a notable ride, like, going to the Commonwealth Games, World Championships, teammate victories, because those are also really big things. Getting to start my first Tour de France. So what he actually did was he did another radar, but like in a circle moving out like a snail, of all of these dots, and then each single dot represented the races in my career. So this took Richard a long time.
Yeah.
So the dots actually have all different colors, which signify wins, victories, teammate. So there's a lot of dots in there. There's more dots than you realize that have no color, because they were just a normal day on the bike, just what it was. But then you've got this beautiful texture that's inlaid into the kit. But each one of those dots is actually very specific to an event in my career. So not only does it add texture and beauty and it makes the jersey look great, for me it's really special because it's actually an illustration of how my career went.
Right.
And some of them, when I can actually see them clumped together, I know exactly which ones it was. And I think that's pretty cool. And then we sort of moved through the different color palettes through the year, and the full circle journey and the color expression and the shape of those circles evolved. And his design process to get there was insane. Like, I think some of them, there might have been 200-300 iterations of the jersey before we landed on the right one. And then he's also flying to Bolzano, to the factory, to headquarters, to actually make sure that the colors are printed exactly the way they need to. Yeah. And so Rich has been really, really involved and engaged. But I think the artistic process that we got to for our frequency jersey, I think this for me is my favorite. We called it the DNA series because we kind of wanted to do an examination of what is gravel. Like, let's strip it back to the basics.
Yeah.
And I study health science, doing a Bachelor of Science, finished next June, so I'm pretty stoked to be finished. But I was studying genetics and epigenetics at that point, and I was like, hey, I'm really fascinated by like the backbone of human beings. There's 4 things. There's only four components that can make up DNA. It's the T, the A, the G, and the C. And I was like, why don't we think about gravel? What are the 4 key tenets of gravel? And we were like, all right, it's events, for sure. It's people, it's places, and also it's sponsors, because sponsors help events actually happen. So it's not even sponsors necessarily for the rider, but like, it's not a non-endemic sport. You don't see riders having, Oracle on their jersey. Everything that is sponsored within gravel is an endemic sponsor. Because I would say 99.9% of the following of gravel are people who actually ride bikes. The participation rate is almost 1-to-1. So we thought, actually, the partners that are involved in the sport they're a key tenet to the whole process. So then what we did was we took those 4 things and we took sound recordings of gravel races. We took sound recordings of people at races, sound recordings at places, and then we also overlaid all of my personal sponsors on an audio file over each other. And then we overlaid all of those together and we created this beautiful spectrograph of sound. And that's exactly what we see I think you can see it here on this jersey here.
Yeah.
So all of these lines here, these are actually the sounds of the DNA of gravel. And then we used the color palette that we worked on, and we actually changed the audio file. So when it spat out this image, it actually spat it out in these colors organically as they sit. And then the texture behind the jersey, because texture seems to be something that Richard also loves to build into a jersey. This is the P, so the people, the events, the places, the races, and the sponsors. And you can kind of see it as like a genetic code moving throughout the jersey. So I think they're really beautiful, but I think the cooler thing is that not everybody will even hear this story. They won't understand it, but there's a lot of design and inspired language that actually goes into what we see as the final product. So it's been an amazing journey with Richard and his brilliance. I feel like I've just been like when you go bowling and you put up the bumper bars to make sure the ball stays straight and it doesn't go off the alley.
Yeah.
But the true genius has been Richard and also just a lot of the color theory and color work that comes directly from Castelli. It's been really cool.
I remember also you telling me, or maybe it was your wife, Laura, telling me about all the designs, suggestions and options Richard, he comes up with, he sends over to you, that picking some color combinations also that you and Laura just had to, I don't know if you printed them out or put everything on the floor and just going over, there were hundreds of different suggestions and options, and
honestly, I can't believe how many there were. Like if I counted them, it would be over 500 for all of the jerseys we've done. But then it's also been really fun. Like something that's felt really special for me is that then Castelli's actually stripped off my sponsors from the jerseys. So as you can see here, it's just the Castelli, and RAD stands for Richard Architecture Design.
Right.
So that's now like a new sort of sub-collection.
It is,
within Castelli.
Exactly. So people can find the 3 jerseys we see here in the background. They can find them castellicycling.
There's 2 others which are
some special SMU
only.
that we have that are only available on castellicycling. So 5 jerseys in total. Unfortunately, most of the jerseys are sold out at the moment, which is also something good. Of course, that is shown that it was a big hit.
I think someone told me in this one there's like a few double XLs left at the warehouse, which is great because I've seen lots of people wearing this stuff.
But the good news is that we'll have something new coming out next year. So, but I like also with the sound profile, what you're saying is just from the shifting symphony of gears to the rhythmic hum of the peloton and the chatter of riders and the soft whisper of wind through the trees and all the things that you're just saying that just went into the jersey design and imagination. And plus, Richard, he's also not new to the brand of Castelli. He was the guy who came up with the first Castelli Team Sky jersey with the victory lines. That was a brilliant concept.
Yeah, it's
still one of my favorite jerseys.
One of the best jerseys there's been.
Yeah, completely. Then Nathan, he also makes your jerseys, like super exclusive jerseys for your race day. This year we had a little less than we had the first season, where you also had a new bike theme or color theme for every race. Maybe it was a little bit too much.
to be honest, we actually had to kind of pull that back because getting custom painted bikes designed all the time.
Yeah.
The hardest thing was actually building the bikes and making sure they were race ready, because it takes a while to bed in a bike.
It does.
There's a lot of components and it's a lot of work, which was an awesome project and we had a lot of fun doing it, but we had to kind of just tone it down a little bit,
But it looked good and it still looks amazing. Especially your latest kit. I know we talked about this on the first part of the episode. I really like that design. And I know you have gotten also a lot of compliments from people around the world. We received a lot of DMs on social for people who are asking, can we buy this?
Yeah, can people please stop messaging me saying, how do I get one? Because at the moment we can't do it yet. But I think they're coming.
Yeah. So,
but one of the inspirations for the jersey that I've got now is that actually Richard and I looked at the peloton, the gravel peloton from lots of different races, and we're like, everyone's wearing a white helmet, everyone's wearing mirrored glasses, and everyone's wearing these like earthy tones, like olive or like browns, which to me is like, wow. And then sometimes even just like pure white kit. And I was like, cool, each one of those look fantastic standalone, but in a peloton, like honestly, we're like camouflaged and we're in a natural environment, so like nothing stands out. So we just said, let's go as loud as we possibly can, but still kind of look good,
but in an artistic way.
So there's a whole backstory to
I think we covered that also in the first part of the episode.
I think we did. I'm a bit tired today.
But yeah, no, it's been a long. Seriously, guys, we started. If you listen to the first episode with Nathan, we met here downtown lunchtime, downtown Girona at the Castelli store before See Other Europe kicked off. And now it's been like 3 days later, and I'm about to catch a flight here in very soon.
Yeah, Soren's got to go.
I gotta go now, yeah. And plus we're all tired because it's been a great event, great show, and you did a lot of racing yesterday, so you must also be tired. Plus you had a lot of other commitments with other partners here and also with the family.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Nathan, thank you so much. Oh, by the way, one last thing here for all our listeners. If you want to know more about the Richard Pearce jerseys or the rack collection, go on to Castelli Cycling on our YouTube channel. We have 2 amazing videos there explaining everything, both with Nathan's words, that's one video, and one with Richard Pearce that were filmed in our office, just taking through all the design directions. And you can check out how also the jerseys all came together. But those are definitely not to miss. I'll also drop a link in the podcast description. So
yeah, the one with Richard, don't bother about mine, but
no, Nathan's is really good.
But Richard's one's really cool, and you actually get a little glimpse as well on the process inside the factory.
Right, exactly.
And you get to see what materials get used and how things get cut and designed and compared on light table. It's very, very cool stuff.
And then an inside view of the Castelli headquarters, because as some of you might know, we have our own sample room, like a big one where we sew everything. We do all prototypes, we do all the kits for Nathan, we do it for other professionals, everything in-house. And this is where we do a lot of when we go out at lunchtime or do a proto testing, we write back into the sample room if you have something that needs to be corrected, just to explain the people behind the sewing machine what needs to be, and product engineering needs to be changed.
That's what sets the men from the boys. I maybe shouldn't make a gendered statement, but it just sets the best from the rest, I think, in the cycling world, because I think it's you and Tactic are the 2 companies that actually have this facility in-house. Right. Everybody else, sometimes the delay is 6 months to make a change. So I think a lot of things actually go to market before they're totally refined, because they don't have the ability to actually print stuff, hand stitch it, go and test it, and bring it back and just keep working on things till it's actually ready. So it's pretty cool. And I think it's what makes you guys so agile in the custom kit world as well, because something can just happen like that.
Yeah. I think sometimes we're driving our product engineers and products people nuts with all the requests, because also refining like a product like 15 times within a very short time frame. But they know and they can see the end result, and they can see the happiness and the smile on the face of professional athletes or amateurs afterwards. So they know what they're doing, but it's just like you just keep going in and knocking the door. But you know, that what you said, that what makes the difference. So
exactly.
Nathan, I think it's a good way to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for your time here in Girona, and thanks for jumping on the Castelli podcast. I really had an awesome time with you this week here at See Other Europe.
Yeah, it was good.
And I can't wait to come back here again to Girona, and hopefully next time we can go for a ride together. I would love that.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Good.
But before the next See Other, I plan to get some sleep, because I am dead.
Yeah. Okay, I better take off for the airport. Thanks again, man, and speak to you soon.
Anytime.
Cool. Ciao.